Is it safe to use the Chinese COVID vaccine? Since COVID-19 first broke out in Wuhan in 2019, the coronavirus pandemic has brought about a catastrophe for all of humanity, posing an unprecedented and continuing threat to human survival and completely altering our way of life. Against the backdrop of the sudden pandemic, scientists have been developing new vaccines in a hurry, with both good and bad news in clinical applications. Many people are now faced with the choice of whether to get vaccinated or not. In particular, China's vaccine diplomacy has prompted 60 countries around the world to start using Chinese vaccines. However, many countries that widely use Chinese vaccines have failed to control the pandemic, resulting in a climbing number of infections and many problems. The reliability and safety of Chinese vaccines is a real concern. In this video, let's briefly summarize and analyze the major vaccines available in the European and American markets, as well as the vaccines produced in China in terms of their mechanism of action and actual post-vaccination data. Hopefully, this will provide some useful information for your reference when you make your choice. The human body defeats viral attacks through the immune system. The process of immunization relies on the ability of the body's immune cells to effectively identify the invading virus, block its replication, kill it, remove it, and repair the system. Our human body is a very complex system. Each cell is a separate world with guards, commanders, and processing plants. The body's natural immune system can easily recognize some invading viruses, such as certain influenza viruses. Once the virus enters the body's guards, or immune system, immediately know that an enemy has entered. These guards will immediately move to eliminate the invaders. The battle is accompanied by fevers, headaches, or other symptoms, which is a state of self-defense. The more cunning viruses, such as the HIV virus, enter the body disguised as friendly forces or hidden inside a Trojan horse, so that they are not recognized by the immune system, thus avoiding detection and attack. In this way, these fraudulent invaders will stay in human cells under disguise, consuming and using the manufacturing plants in the cellular world to reproduce more disguised copies. By the time the immune system realizes that it has been deceived, it is too late and ends up being outnumbered and surrendering, which is also the end of the person's life. This coronavirus is highly deceptive and can evolve and adapt rapidly as though it is a viral weapon designed and manufactured specifically to defeat the human immune system. Vaccines are designed to help the immune system improve its ability to recognize viruses. Conventional vaccines are inactivated vaccines. This means that it sends viruses that have already lost their ability to grow and reproduce, or have already died, into the body. In other words, it sends in enemy corpses so that the guards can see clearly what the enemy looks like, what the enemy's symbols and weapons look like, and remember them so that when the real enemy, the real virus, invades, they will not be fooled. When the vaccine is injected, the guards in the human body will swarm to the enemy's corpses and start fighting exercises, thus remembering the enemy's appearance so that they will not be deceived by the virus in the future. During this process, the immune system produces and remembers antibodies specialized to the characteristics of the virus. Once the virus really appears, the immune system is awakened and the body rapidly produces the antibody, which locks onto the virus like a shackle. The immune cells recognize the antibody-virus combination and devour and digest it, thus effectively eliminating the virus. This is what happens when an inactivated virus is used to stimulate the immune system to produce antibodies. In 2020, the global coronavirus pandemic came very suddenly, making the development of a vaccine imminent. President Trump approached several pharmaceutical giants to come up with a vaccine as soon as possible and promised that the government would provide loans and purchase the vaccine. Traditionally, a vaccine takes several to a dozen years to develop and launch. However, this time, due to the urgency of the pandemic, the COVID vaccine was completed and launched in just 1 year, which means it will take more time to understand the full range of short and long-term side effects of the vaccine and their causes. There are currently 2 major vaccines in the European and the United States markets. One of them is a new genetic vaccine called an mRNA vaccine. It works by sending a blueprint of the virus into human cells, allowing the manufacturing plants in the cells to produce its own sample of the virus based on the blueprint, and then allowing the guards and immune system to recognize the intruder and kill it. This was the first time in the history of human pandemic prevention that RNA was introduced into a drug, and it was the result of being forced to do so by the COVID-19 pandemic. The vaccine jointly developed by Pfizer-BioNTech and produced by Moderna are mRNA vaccines. From the data published so far, the effectiveness and safety performance of the mRNA vaccines are pretty good, and the efficiency rate can reach over 90%, which is not too different from the data in the Phase 3 clinical report study. According to the data released by the CDC in April, the effectiveness of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 mRNA vaccine in preventing COVID-19 asymptomatic infection reached 95.3%. Another major vaccine is the Adenoviral vectors vaccine. This vaccine uses a different technology from the mRNA vaccine. It also provides cells with a blueprint that allows the immune system to recognize the virus, but is a little more complicated since the blueprint requires the human body to decrypt it. The Adenoviral vectors vaccine places the gene of COVID-19 in an adenovirus, which is a widespread virus in nature and leads to certain reactions when the human body is exposed to it. Because of its low toxicity, the effect is relatively small, producing flu-like symptoms. The AstraZeneca vaccine from Oxford, Europe, and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine from the United States are both adenoviral vectors vaccines. The post-vaccination efficiency figures for AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson are both over 90%, which is consistent with their Phase 3 clinical reports. However, the biggest concern is that there have been cases of blood clotting after vaccination with the adenoviral vectors vaccines, predominantly in young women, but the cause is unknown. The U.S. government suspended the use of Johnson & Johnson's vaccine for a time after several cases of blood clotting occurred. A similar situation occurred in Europe, where Oxford's AstraZeneca administered 17 million doses in the UK in March and found 37 cases of blood clots. It was suspended in Europe for a week, even though most doctors in Europe were against the suspension. Later, a European country came out and said that the formation of blood clots shouldn't be related to the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, so injections were resumed shortly afterwards. After 45 million doses, the number of blood clots rose to 165, or 3.7 per million, which is said to be 100 times lower than the 3.3 per million chance of an American being struck by lightning once in his or her lifetime. However, for the sake of safety, doctors recommend that if you have a headache for more than 4 days after the vaccination, or if you have unexplained bruises, it is best to see a doctor. Generally, within 1 or 2 days after vaccination, some people will experience headaches, fever, and physical fatigue, which are normal reactions. However, if these reactions persist, it is important to be aware of any adverse conditions. As far as we know, the mRNA vaccines have the least post-vaccination reactions. Let's look at the vaccine situation in China. The earliest outbreak of COVID-19 occurred in Wuhan, China, where the Wuhan Virus Research Institute P4 laboratory had a virus extremely similar to that of COVID-19, and Chinese researchers had the earliest strain and genetic sequence of COVID-19. However, despite all of this, Chinese Communist Party authorities not only covered up the outbreak, which led to the global pandemic, but also refused to share information about the virus with the outside world, causing unwarranted disruption and delay in the global effort to develop a vaccine. Ironically, to date, the 4 CCP-approved Chinese vaccines have not been included in the World Health Organization's emergency use list, and Chinese vaccine manufacturers have not publicly released complete Phase 3 clinical trial effectiveness data. As an importer of Chinese vaccines, Brazil is the only country that has published interim Phase 3 clinical trial data for Chinese vaccines. According to Brazil's April 2021 report, the CoronaVac by Sinovac had an effective protection rate of only 50.7%, just above the WHO's passing score. In Chile, the country with the highest number of CoronaVac vaccines injected, the protection rate was only 3% at the 28-day interval after the first dose of the vaccine, 27.7% within 2 weeks after the second dose of the vaccine, and the highest figure after 2 weeks was only 56.5%, which also just crossed the WHO's 50% passing score. At present, the mainstream Chinese vaccines can be divided into 4 major categories in terms of production technology, each of which differs in terms of effectiveness in preventing infection and the extent to which side effects affect the human body. Among them, the ones now being promoted in China, both for vaccine diplomacy in other countries and for widespread injection in the mainland, are inactivated vaccines produced by 3 Chinese companies: Sinopharm Beijing, Sinopharm Wuhan, and Sinovac. The inactivated vaccine is produced by killing the complete virus strain and then using it. This vaccine isn't as technologically advanced, with poor prevention effects, too many side effects, and 3 major risks. The first is whether the virus can be completely inactivated and whether any residual virus will be left. Because the process of inactivation is very demanding, it needs to be done in P3 laboratories. But with such a huge demand for the COVID vaccine, there aren't enough P3 laboratories for mass production. A few days ago, CDC Director Gao Fu revealed for the first time that some laboratories in China had been transformed into small factories for large-scale production of inactivated vaccines. As you can imagine, whether there are any irregularities in such modified production plants and whether the virus can be completely inactivated there are concerns. Even if only 0.1% of the inactivated virus remains, it can directly infect people. Especially in China, with its large population, the vaccination base is so large that 0.1% of 100 million doses would mean 100,000 people would be infected by the vaccine. The second major risk is that, unlike other vaccines that extract only fragments of the virus, inactivated vaccines use the entire virus, which contains many of the virus's proteins. It is difficult to guarantee that all the components of the virus will not cause side effects after entering the human body. The inactivated vaccine produced by China National Pharmaceuticals has 73 adverse reactions listed in its instruction manual, which can be considered the highest in the world. The third major risk is that inactivated vaccines will almost certainly cause an ADE effect. This means that after injection, the immune system could produce a specific antibody against a specific virus, but loses its ability to defend against new variants of the virus. Although the old antibodies in the body will be able to recognize an invasion of a new variant of the virus, it'll be unable to latch onto it properly to subdue it, creating very weak antibody-virus combinations. With the help of the weak combination, the virus uses the antibodies as a mask to enter cells. When immune cells detect the antibody, the virus can break the combination so that only the antibodies are captured while the virus escapes and continues to invade cells. Because of the ADE effect, the immune system treats the disguised virus as one of its own cells, and the vaccinated person does not react to the disease until the body is so heavily damaged by the virus that it cannot support itself and suddenly collapses. In this way, the vaccine actually enhances the virus's infection ability, effectively equipping the human body with a self-destruction button. In China, people need to sign an informed consent form before vaccination, and one of the forms explicitly warns the vaccine recipient of the ADE effect as a major side effect. Today, with the rapid development of vaccine technology, none of the countries in the international community that have the ability to develop COVID vaccines have developed inactivated vaccines. Only the Chinese Communist Party has made a big deal of producing and promoting them. China's CDC Director Gao Fu mainly referred to inactivated vaccines when he admitted that the protection rate of Chinese vaccines is not high, and this quickly became the focus of international public opinion. The second type of vaccine in China is the Adenoviral vectors vaccine produced by CanSino Bio. One detail that is particularly important here is the type of adenovirus used as the vaccine vector. The AstraZeneca vaccine uses the chimpanzee adenoviral vector, which humans are relatively less resistant to, while the adenovirus used in the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is the AD26 variant. The CanSino Bio vaccine uses AD5, and the Russian vaccine has 2 doses, the first of which is AD5 and the second of which is AD26. An adenovirus is a virus that is widespread in nature and may be encountered by anyone in their lifetime. If it has been encountered before, then the body has already developed an immune response to the virus, thus creating an antibody. In fact, medical science has proven that countless people in the world have developed antibodies to adenoviruses. Therefore, for those who are resistant, the adenoviral vectors carrying the coronavirus will not enter the body at all, making the vaccine ineffective. The good thing is that humans have different rates of resistance to different types of adenoviruses. For example, 50% of people in Africa are resistant to the AD26 adenovirus used by Johnson & Johnson, but only 15% of people are resistant in the United States, which means that at least the effectiveness of Johnson & Johnson for Americans is high. In contrast, a large proportion of people worldwide have antibodies against the AD5 adenovirus used in China's CanSino Bio vaccine, with nearly 80% of people in Africa and nearly 40% in the United States resistant to it. A medical report in China in 2010 found that nearly 80% of the population already had antibodies, which means that 80 out of 100 Chinese vaccinated with the CanSino Bio vaccine have antibodies that will make the adenoviral vectors vaccine completely ineffective. The third type of vaccine in China is the recombinant protein vaccine, a new CHO vaccine from Zhifei Bio. CHO refers to Chinese hamster ovary cells, an important cell in the production of protein-based drugs. The difference between the recombinant protein vaccine and the adenoviral vectors vaccine is that the adenovirus is injected into the human body with a virus that is less harmful to the human body, while the recombinant protein vaccine puts the coronavirus into the CHO and then injects the protein extracted from the CHO into the human body. In other words, the recombinant protein vaccine injects a protein, not the virus. The advantage of this vaccine is that no virus enters the body, but the disadvantage is that the immune response induced by this protein is actually very weak, and so 3 doses are required. The vaccine has just finished its second clinical phase, but it is said that the vaccine is now widely injected in China. Without the completion of the phase 3 clinical course, widespread use of this vaccine is creating many unknown future risks. The fourth category is the mRNA vaccine. There is news that China's Fosun Pharma decided to purchase up to 100 million vaccines jointly developed by Pfizer and BioNTech at the end of last year. In the first half of 2021, many countries began a wide range of vaccination work. China's order of imported vaccines should also be on its way, but the distribution plan for the 100 million vaccines has not been announced. It is said that the vaccine will only be used in Hong Kong. There is also news that an mRNA vaccine developed by China has entered phase 3 clinical trials, but no phase 1 or 2 data can be found on the internet, so doubts remain. In the US, Moderna and BioNTech both spent more than 3 years researching and implementing key technical aspects of mRNA. It is not known how China can accomplish a similar breakthrough independently in a few months. The key problem with Chinese vaccines is that the ones that are heavily promoted and exported domestically are all inactivated vaccines, which are the most problematic and risky. Some may ask, isn't the pandemic in China well under control? If we only consider the official Chinese statement, then yes. But the problem is that the data from mainland China is so scarce that there is no way of knowing the real situation, and it is not comparable to the transparent data of other countries. In fact, we can deduce the general situation of the Chinese vaccine from the genuine data from other countries that have used the Chinese vaccine. This transparent data allows people to see the effectiveness and safety of the Chinese vaccine more clearly. Turkey is using the inactivated vaccine from Sinovac, and more than 7 million people have been vaccinated. But since the middle of last month, the number of infections has been increasing and is now reaching a record high. Chile and Brazil, both large recipients of the Chinese vaccine, have had a new surge in infections after mass vaccination. There have been reports of celebrities from all fields getting infected after receiving the vaccine, such as 2 Chilean bishops who were infected and hospitalized after receiving the Chinese vaccine. The Philippine Presidential Security Guard, which received the Chinese vaccine last year, has had a total of 126 people test positive for the virus so far. In Pakistan, the president tested positive after the prime minister tested positive, and both had received the Chinese vaccine. In stark contrast, the United Kingdom and the United States have seen new infections drop after mass vaccination in a very clear curve. The efficacy of the Chinese vaccine has yet to be evaluated more accurately by peers with more adequate data, and the risks of the Chinese vaccine are indeed worrisome. So, should we get vaccinated or not? This is a question that many people struggle with. According to currently available information, the infection rate of COVID-19 in the United States is 10%, and the mortality rate after infection is 1.79%. The rate of allergic reactions, including blood clots, to the 2 vaccines available in the US and Europe is about 3 to 4 in 1 million. It sounds like the risk from the vaccine is much lower than the risk of death from infection. But at the end of the day, the most fundamental goal in fighting the virus is to improve our own immune systems.